In the underworld of New York, respect is the only currency that matters, and silence is often the loudest weapon. When the terrifying head of the Giordano crime family walked into Il Palazzo, the most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan, everyone stopped breathing. But then, a shy, trembling waitress named Elena did the unthinkable. She didn't just serve him. She spoke to him in a dialect so old and specific to the hills of Corleone that it stopped a war before it could start. Who was she really? And why did the most dangerous man in the city suddenly look at her like he had seen a ghost? The truth was buried in blood, and tonight, the grave was opening. The air inside Il Palazzo always smelled of truffle oil, aged mahogany, and fear. It was a subtle fear, hidden beneath the clinking of crystal wine glasses and the murmur of politicians making deals with men who didn't exist on paper. For Elena Rossi, fear was just background noise. She had lived with it for so long it felt like a second skin. At 23, Elena was the kind of woman people looked through, not at. She wore her uniform, a crisp white shirt and black vest, like armor. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe, tight bun that hurt her scalp, and she kept her eyes on the floor. "Table 4 needs water, Elena. Move it," snapped Marco, the floor manager. Marco was a man who sweated grease and anxiety. He knew who was coming tonight, and his hands were shaking as he polished a fork for the 10th time. "Yes, Marco," Elena whispered. Her voice was soft, barely a ripple in the chaotic kitchen. She moved through the dining room with the grace of a ghost. She was good at being invisible. It was how she had survived the orphanages in Palermo before getting adopted and brought to America. It was how she survived the foster homes in Queens. And it was how she intended to survive tonight. The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted at exactly 8 p.m. It wasn't a sound. It was a pressure drop. The heavy oak doors swung open, and the ambient chatter died instantly. 3 men entered first. They were broad, wearing suits that cost more than Elena made in a year. They scanned the room with predatory eyes, checking exits, checking hands, checking threats. Then he walked in. Lorenzo, the Lion Giordano, the capo di tutti I capi, the boss of bosses. He was in his late 60s, but he moved with the terrifying vitality of a man half his age. His hair was silver, swept back from a face etched with the history of violent victories. He didn't walk, he prowled. Beside him was his son, Santino Giordano. Santino was different. He was the future of the family, 30 years old, dangerously handsome, with eyes like shattered glass. Where his father was old-world brutishness, Santino was cold, calculated, corporate efficiency. But tonight, even Santino looked tense. "The corner booth," Marco squeaked, rushing forward, bowing so low his nose nearly brushed the carpet. "Mr. Giordano, Mr. Santino, an honor, a true honor." Lorenzo didn't acknowledge him. He just kept walking. The entire restaurant watched in terrified silence. A senator in the corner quickly paid his bill and left. A famous actress pretended to text, her hands trembling. They sat at the private booth, the one with the high velvet back that blocked the rest of the room. The 3 bodyguards took up positions around the perimeter. In the kitchen, panic was setting in. "Who's taking the table?" the head chef, Chef Antoine, hissed. "Giovanni is sick. Ricky is shaking so bad he'll drop the soup." Marco looked around wildly. His eyes landed on Elena. "No," she breathed, stepping back. "Please, Marco, I can't." "You're the only one who speaks Italian besides me, and I have to manage the floor," Marco growled, grabbing her arm. "You go out there, you pour the wine. You take the order. You look at the table, not their eyes. Do not, I repeat, do not speak unless spoken to. If you spill a drop, don't bother coming back here. You'll be dead anyway." Elena felt her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She wasn't just shy. She was terrified of men like the Giordanos. She knew what they were. She remembered the stories from the old country, whispered by the nuns in the orphanage. "Here!" Marco shoved a vintage bottle of Barolo into her hands. "Go!" Elena took a deep breath, her hands surprisingly steady. Survival mode. She walked out of the kitchen, the noise fading away. The walk to the corner booth felt like walking to the gallows. As she approached, she heard them arguing. "This deal with the Russians is poison, Papa," Santino was saying, his voice low and sharp. "They don't respect the territory. We need to cut them off before the feds get involved." "The Russians bring cash, Santino." Lorenzo's voice was gravel and smoke. "Cash we need if we are to buy the Port Authority. You think too much like a banker. You need to think like a Sicilian." "I think like a survivor," Santino countered. Elena stepped into the circle of silence around their table. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said, her English accented but clear. She kept her eyes on the white tablecloth. Silence. She could feel Santino staring at her. It wasn't a lecherous stare. It was the scan of a predator assessing a new element in the environment. "Open it," Lorenzo commanded, gesturing to the wine. Elena produced the corkscrew. She worked efficiently, expertly removing the cork without a sound. She poured a small amount into Lorenzo's glass for the tasting. Lorenzo swirled the wine, watching the red liquid coat the glass. He took a sip. He grunted. "Good. Pour." Elena moved to pour Santino's glass. As she leaned in, the heavy silver cross she wore, a cheap thing she had kept since childhood, swung out from her shirt and clicked against the wine glass. Clink. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet booth. Lorenzo's hand shot out and grabbed Elena's wrist. His grip was iron. "Papa!" Santino warned, his hand moving toward his jacket where a gun surely rested. Elena gasped, nearly dropping the bottle. She looked up, her brown eyes wide with terror, meeting Lorenzo's gaze. "Clumsy!" Lorenzo spat. "You disrupt my dinner." "You disrupt my peace." He wasn't going to hurt her, not really. He was just a bully asserting dominance, a man used to everyone trembling before him. But the grip was painful. "I am sorry, signore," she stammered in English. "Sorry isn't enough," Lorenzo growled. "In my house, clumsiness is weakness, and I hate weakness." He squeezed harder. Elena winced. The fear was vanishing, replaced by a sudden, hot flash of indignation. It was a feeling she rarely let surface, the Sicilian temper she had been born with. She didn't pull away. Instead, she stopped trembling. She looked directly into Lorenzo's eyes. And then, she spoke. She didn't speak in English. She didn't speak in the standard Italian taught in schools. She spoke in the heavy ancient dialect of the Sicilian interior, specifically the dialect of a small village called Corleone, a dialect that was dying out, spoken only by the oldest families. "Lassa sta, Don Lorenzo, a manu siati d'uno pani, un si muzzica." Let go, Don Lorenzo. The hand that brings you bread is not to be bitten. The air left the booth. Santino's mouth opened slightly. The bodyguards, who were close enough to hear, stiffened. Lorenzo froze. His eyes widened, the pupils contracting. He looked at this waitress, this nobody in a cheap uniform, as if she had just pulled a sword from a stone. Slowly, very slowly, Lorenzo released her wrist. "What did you say?" he whispered, his voice trembling, not with rage, but with shock. Elena rubbed her wrist, realizing what she had done. The adrenaline crashed. "I apologize. I will get the manager." "Stay," Lorenzo commanded. The cruelty was gone from his face, replaced by an intense, burning curiosity. "Where did you learn to speak the tongue of the hills? You are a child. No one speaks like that anymore, not even in Palermo." "I learned it from the songs," Elena whispered, reverting to English. "From the old women in the orphanage, before I came here." Lorenzo looked at Santino. "Did you hear that tone, Santino? That cadence? That is the sound of my mother. That is the sound of the earth." Santino was looking at Elena differently now. The cold calculation was gone. He looked intrigued. And perhaps, for the first time in his life, impressed. "What is your name?" Santino asked. His voice was smoother than his father's, darker. "Elena, sir! Elena Rossi!" Lorenzo leaned back, a strange smile playing on his lips. "Elena, a Greek name, but you have a Sicilian heart. Sit." "Sir, I cannot." I said sit! Lorenzo barked, then softened. Please, join us. I want to hear more of this tongue. It has been 30 years since I heard it spoken with such fire. Marco, watching from a distance, looked ready to faint. His waitress was sitting with the godfather. Elena sat on the edge of the velvet seat, across from Santino. She felt exposed, dangerous. Tell me, Elena, Lorenzo said, pouring her a glass of the $300 wine. Who are your people? A Rossi from where? I don't know, she admitted quietly. I was found on the steps of the San Domenico church. No note, just this cross. She touched the cheap silver medal. Lorenzo's eyes dropped to the cross. He squinted. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a pair of reading glasses. He leaned in closer to her chest, not in a sexual way, but investigating. Let me see that, he said. Elena unclasped it and handed it to him. Lorenzo held the cross up to the dim light. It looked generic, tarnished. But then he turned it over. He ran his thumb over the back. His face went pale. The blood drained from his cheeks so fast he looked like a corpse. Papa? Santino leaned forward. What is it? Lorenzo didn't answer. His hand began to shake. He looked from the cross to Elena, then back to the cross. Santino, Lorenzo whispered, his voice sounding like it was coming from underwater. Call the car. We are leaving. But we haven't ordered, Santino said, confused. Now! Lorenzo roared, slamming his hand on the table. The cutlery jumped. He stood up abruptly, shoving the cross into his pocket. My cross, Elena said, standing up. Sir, please. Lorenzo looked at her. His eyes were filled with a mixture of horror and heartbreak that Elena couldn't understand. You will get it back, child, Lorenzo said, his voice thick with emotion. Santino, give her your card. We will send for her tomorrow. Send for her? Santino asked, bewildered. She comes to the estate tomorrow, noon. Do not fail me. With that, the Lion of New York turned and marched out of the restaurant, leaving his son and a bewildered waitress standing in the ruins of the evening. Santino looked at Elena. He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a heavy black card with gold embossing. Be ready at noon, Santino said. My driver will pick you up. I don't understand, Elena said, her voice shaking. Am I in trouble? Santino looked at her, his dark eyes searching her face. With my father? I don't know. He never runs from a fight, but tonight he ran from you. He placed the card in her hand. His fingers lingered for a second on her palm. Don't disappear, Elena. I have a feeling you just became the most important person in New York. Santino turned and followed his father. Elena stood alone in the corner booth. The restaurant was dead silent. Everyone was staring. Marco was sprinting toward her. But Elena wasn't looking at them. She was looking at the empty wine glass Lorenzo had left behind, wondering what secret lay on the back of a cheap silver cross she had worn for 23 years. Elena didn't sleep. Her small studio apartment in the Bronx felt like a cage. Every siren outside made her jump. She spent the night pacing, replaying the moment Lorenzo Giordano looked at her cross and saw a ghost. By 11 a.m., she was dressed. She didn't have fancy clothes. She wore her best Sunday dress, a simple navy blue floral print that was 3 years old, and a pair of sensible flats. She pulled her hair down from the severe bun, letting the dark waves frame her face. She looked less like a waitress and more like the young woman she was. Vulnerable, but with a chin held high. At 11:55 a.m., a black SUV as big as a tank pulled up to the curb of her crumbling apartment building. The neighbors were already peeking out from behind curtains. In this neighborhood, a car like that meant one of two things: a drug bust or a death sentence. The driver was a man made of muscle and silence. He opened the door for her. Ms. Rossi! Elena climbed in. The interior smelled of expensive leather and peppermint. The ride to Long Island was silent. Elena watched the city fade into the sprawling estates of the North Shore. They turned onto a private road, winding through iron gates that looked strong enough to stop a missile. The Giordano estate was not a house. It was a fortress disguised as a mansion. High stone walls, cameras everywhere, and men with earpieces patrolling the grounds with German shepherds. The car stopped in front of the main entrance. Santino was waiting on the steps. He looked different in the daylight, less menacing, more human. He was wearing a casual gray sweater and dark jeans, but the Rolex on his wrist and the way he stood still screamed power. He opened the car door himself. "You came," he said. "I didn't think I had a choice," Elena replied, stepping out. "There's always a choice, Elena," Santino said softly. "But you made the right one. My father has been agitated since last night. He hasn't slept." "What is going on?" Elena asked, desperation creeping into her voice. "Why did he take my cross? Who are you people to me?" "That's what we're here to find out," Santino said. "Come." He led her through the house. It was like a museum. Marble floors, Renaissance paintings, statues that looked older than America. But it was cold. It felt like a house without a mother. They entered a massive library with floor-to-ceiling books. A fire was roaring in the fireplace, despite the mild weather. Lorenzo was sitting in a leather armchair, staring into the flames. He held the silver cross in his hand, rubbing it rhythmically. "Papa," Santino said, "she is here." Lorenzo didn't look up immediately. "Close the door, Santino. Stay." Santino closed the heavy oak doors. Lorenzo turned. His eyes were red-rimmed. He looked older than he had the night before. He held up the cross. "Where did you get this?" he asked. His voice was devoid of the aggression from the restaurant. It was hollow. "I told you," Elena said, her voice trembling slightly but gaining strength. "I was found with it. It's the only thing I have from my parents." "Do you know what is inscribed on the back?" Lorenzo asked. "No," Elena shook her head. "It's just scratches. It's worn down." "It is not scratches," Lorenzo said. "It is a coat of arms, and a date." He stood up and walked toward her. Elena held her ground. "This cross," Lorenzo said, his voice breaking, "belonged to my brother, Antonio." Elena blinked. "Your brother?" "Antonio was the best of us," Lorenzo said, a tear slipping down his cheek. "He didn't want the life. He didn't want the business. He wanted to be a teacher. He fell in love with a woman from Corleone, a village girl, beautiful, fierce. She spoke the dialect just like you did last night." Santino was watching his father, stunned. "Uncle Antonio? You never talk about him. You said he died in a car accident in '98. "I lied," Lorenzo whispered. "He didn't die in an accident. He was hunted. By the Russos. Our enemies." Lorenzo looked at Elena, his eyes searching every inch of her face. "Antonio and his wife, Maria, they had a baby, a daughter, in 2002. They went into hiding. I tried to protect them, but the Russos found them in a safe house near Palermo." Elena felt the room spinning. "My men arrived too late," Lorenzo continued. "The house was burned. We found Antonio and Maria's bodies. But the baby was gone. We thought she had burned to ash. We thought there was nothing left to bury." Lorenzo held out the cross. "Antonio wore this every day. He put it around his daughter's neck the day she was born to protect her. He carved the date on the back himself." Lorenzo took a step closer to Elena. He reached out a trembling hand and touched her cheek. "You have Maria's eyes," he whispered, "and you have Antonio's chin." Elena stepped back, her breath hitching. No, this is a story. I'm nobody. I'm a waitress." "You are not a waitress," Lorenzo roared, the sudden volume making her jump. "You are Elena Giordano. You are my blood. You are the daughter of the only man I ever loved." The revelation hung in the air like smoke. Santino looked at Elena with wide eyes. "Cousin?" he whispered. "I don't believe you," Elena said, tears streaming down her face. "You're Mafia. You lie. You manipulate. Why should I believe you?" "Because of the dialect," Lorenzo said intensely. "You speak the dialect because it is in your blood memory, and because of the test." "What test?" "DNA," Santino interjected, his voice sharp and practical. "We can run a test, right now. We have a private doctor on staff. We can know in 24 hours. Lorenzo nodded. "Give us a sample, Elena. If I am wrong, I will give you $1 million and you will never see us again. But if I am right, then you are home, and you are in grave danger." Danger? Elena asked. If you are Antonio's daughter, Santino said, stepping forward, his face hardening, then you are the heir to a legacy the Russos tried to wipe out. And if they find out you're alive, they will come to finish the job. Elena looked between the two men, the lion and the prince. They were offering her a family, a history, and a target on her back. She looked at the cross in Lorenzo's hand. It was the only clue to who she was. Okay, Elena whispered, do the test. The waiting was a form of torture that Elena was not accustomed to. In the restaurant business, stress was immediate. A dropped plate, a wrong order, a yelling customer. It hit you, you dealt with it, and it was over. But in the Giordano mansion, stress was a heavy, silent fog that filled every room. Elena was given a guest suite that was larger than her entire apartment building in the Bronx. It had silk wallpapers painted with scenes of the Tuscan countryside, a 4-poster bed draped in Egyptian cotton, and a balcony that overlooked the manicured gardens where armed men patrolled with the regularity of clockwork. She couldn't sleep. She spent the hours pacing the room, touching the expensive objects, feeling like an intruder. Imposter syndrome didn't even begin to cover it. She was a waitress who scraped tips to pay for heating. She wasn't a Mafia princess. At 3 a.m., a soft knock on her door made her jump. She opened it to find Santino. He had discarded his sweater and was wearing a black t-shirt that showed the intricate ink of tattoos running down his arms, markings that looked tribal, dangerous. He held a tray with a silver pot of tea and 2 cups. I saw your light was still on from the garden, he said, his voice low. I couldn't sleep either. Elena stepped back to let him in. Is this normal? She asked, gesturing to the opulent room. Insomnia? The gun's outside. For us. Yes. Santino set the tray on a small mahogany table. Silence is the loudest sound in this house. It usually means someone is plotting something. He poured the tea. It smelled of chamomile and honey. Why are you being so kind to me? Elena asked, sitting opposite him. Yesterday you looked like you wanted to execute me for clinking a glass. Today, you're bringing me tea. Santino looked at her, his dark eyes unreadable. Yesterday, you were a threat, a stranger who got too close to the king. Today you might be family. And family is the only religion we practice here. He took a sip of tea, watching her over the rim of the cup. Tell me about your life, Elena, the real one, not the version you tell the social workers. Elena wrapped her hands around the warm cup. There's not much to tell. I work double shifts. I read cheap romance novels to fall asleep. I try to save money to go to nursing school, but the rent keeps going up. I'm invisible, Santino. That's my life. You have the hands of a worker, Santino observed, looking at her roughened fingers. But you have the carriage of a queen. My father saw it. I see it now. And if the test is negative, Elena asked, her voice barely a whisper, if I'm just an orphan with a coincidentally similar cross? Santino leaned forward, the air between them charged with a strange, confusing electricity. Then, I will personally drive you back to the Bronx. I will give you the money my father promised, and I will ensure no one ever bothers you again. But I don't think that will happen. Why? Because the Giordanos have a look, Santino said, a shadow crossing his face. A darkness. You have it. I don't. Elena frowned. What do you mean? You look exactly like a Giordano. Santino smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I look the part. I act the part. But I was adopted, Elena. My father took me in when I was 2. My biological parents were associates who died in a turf war. Lorenzo raised me as his own, gave me his name, made me his underboss. But by blood, I am not a Giordano. Elena was stunned. Does anyone else know? The inner circle knows. The public thinks I am his biological son. It keeps the line of succession clear. Santino looked at the door. If you are Antonio's daughter, you are the only true blood heir left. You understand what that means? It means you outrank me. It means you outrank everyone. The gravity of his words settled on Elena like a lead blanket. She wasn't just auditioning for a family. She was auditioning for a throne she didn't want. The next morning, the library was transformed into a command center. Lorenzo sat behind his massive desk, smoking a cigar, his eyes fixed on the antique clock on the wall. At 11 a.m. sharp, the heavy doors opened. A man in a pristine white lab coat entered, carrying a sealed manila envelope. This was Dr. Adrian Vance, the family's private physician, a man who had stitched up more bullet holes than he had treated flu cases. Don Lorenzo. Dr. Vance nodded respectfully. He looked at Santino, then at Elena. "Read it," Lorenzo commanded. The cigar smoke swirled around his head like a halo. Dr. Vance broke the seal. The sound of tearing paper was deafening in the silent room. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. He adjusted his glasses. "I compared the sample from Ms. Rossi against the genetic markers on file for your late brother, Antonio Giordano, and the familial markers from your own DNA, Don Lorenzo." Elena stopped breathing. Santino was gripping the back of a leather chair so hard his knuckles were white. "The probability of paternity is 99.9998%, Dr. Vance announced calmly. "It is a match. She is his daughter." Lorenzo let out a sound that was half sob, half roar. He dropped his cigar on the expensive Persian rug and didn't even notice. He stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor, and rushed around the desk. Elena stood frozen as the most feared man in New York fell to his knees in front of her. Lorenzo Giordano, the lion, buried his face in her hands and wept. "Maria," he choked out. "Antonio, they didn't die in vain. You're here. You're actually here." Elena felt tears prick her own eyes. For 23 years, she had been a mistake, a discard, a question mark. Now she was an answer. She looked at Santino. He was watching them with a complex expression. Relief, surely, but also a sharp realization of the shift in power. Lorenzo stood up, wiping his eyes with a silk handkerchief. The vulnerability vanished instantly, replaced by the iron mask of the Godfather. "Santino," Lorenzo barked. "Lock down the estate. Code red security." "Yes, Papa," Santino said, pulling out his phone. "Dr. Vance, you are dismissed." "You speak of this to no one," Lorenzo ordered. Then he turned to Elena. He placed his heavy hands on her shoulders. "Listen to me, Elena," he said, his voice intense. "Elena Rossi is dead. Do you understand? She died the moment that doctor read that paper." "But my apartment, my job at the restaurant," Elena stammered. "Your apartment will be cleared out by my men tonight. Anything sentimental will be brought here. The rest will be burned," Lorenzo said coldly. "As for the restaurant, you do not work there anymore." "I can't just quit. Marco needs." Lorenzo laughed, a dry, barking sound. "Elena, I bought the building this morning. I own Il Palazzo. Marco works for you now. If you want, you can fire him. If you want, you can burn the place down. It is yours." Elena's jaw dropped. "You bought the restaurant?" "I buy what I want. And I protect what is mine," Lorenzo said. "And you are mine now. You are a Giordano. But you must understand the cost. The Russos, they killed your parents to end this bloodline. When they find out you are alive, and they will find out, they will come for you with everything they have." "So what do I do?" Elena asked, feeling the walls closing in. "You learn," Lorenzo said. "You stop being a waitress. You start being a queen. Santino will teach you the business. I will teach you the history. And my guards will teach you how to stay alive." Lorenzo walked to the window, looking out at the gray sky. "Welcome home, niece," he whispered. "The war is about to begin." The transformation of Elena took 3 days, and it was more grueling than any double shift she had ever worked. It wasn't just about clothes, though there were plenty of those. A team of stylists was flown in from Milan. They stripped away the polyester uniforms and replaced them with silk, cashmere, and structured blazers that made her look formidable. They cut her hair, shaping the long, unruly waves into a sleek, glossy mane that cascaded down her back like dark water. But the real work was internal. Santino was her tutor. He was relentless. "Stand up straight," he corrected her in the expansive dining room. "You walk like you're apologizing for taking up space." A Giordano never apologizes for existing. "I'm not used to people looking at me," Elena snapped back, exhausted. "Get used to it," Santino said, circling her. When you walk into a room, you own the air in it. Look them in the eye. If you look down, you look weak. Weakness gets you killed. He taught her the structure of the 5 families. He taught her the history of the feud with the Russos, a blood feud that went back to Sicily, over land, olive groves, and pride. He taught her how to spot a wire, how to check a car for explosives, and how to tell if someone was lying by watching the pulse in their neck. "Why do you care so much if I survive?" Elena asked him on the 3rd day, during a lesson on defensive driving in the estate's massive garage. Santino paused, his hand resting on the hood of a bulletproof Mercedes. "Because this life is lonely, Elena. My father is a king, but he is alone on the mountain. I have been alone beside him. You are the first real thing that has happened to this family in 20 years. He looked at her, and for a moment the barrier between teacher and student thinned. "And because," he added softly, "you remind me of the things I can never be." Before Elena could ask what he meant, the garage doors opened. Lorenzo walked in. "Enough training," Lorenzo announced. "Tonight, we test the steel." "Tonight?" Elena asked. "Sunday dinner," Lorenzo said. "The capos are coming. My 3 top lieutenants. They need to meet you. They need to pledge loyalty to the blood." "They won't like it," Santino warned his father. "They're used to me being the heir, bringing in a girl, a waitress. It will look like instability." "Let them look," Lorenzo snarled. "If they blink, I will remove their eyes." The dining room was set for 12, though only 5 would be eating. The chandelier cast a golden glow over the crystal and silver. Elena wore a deep crimson dress that fit her like a second skin, high-necked but backless, signaling both modesty and power. She wore the silver cross, now polished to a shine, around her neck. The 3 capos arrived. First was Salvatore Big Sal Moretti, a man who looked like a walking boulder. He controlled the unions. Second was Frankie the Fixer Russo, no relation to the enemy clan, a constant source of jokes. A wiry man with nervous eyes who handled the gambling. Third was the most dangerous, Dante the Knife Corelli, young, ambitious, and violent. He controlled the drugs, though Lorenzo technically forbade dealing them. They kissed Lorenzo's ring. They nodded respectfully to Santino. When they saw Elena standing by the fireplace, the room went cold. "Gentlemen," Lorenzo said, his voice booming, "this is Elena, my niece, the daughter of Antonio." The silence stretched. Dante Corelli smirked. He looked Elena up and down, not with respect, but with the look one gives a prostitute. "Antonio's daughter?" Dante laughed. "I heard she was slinging pasta in Manhattan. We're bringing waitresses to the high table now, Don Lorenzo." Santino stepped forward, his fists clenching, but Elena put a hand out to stop him. She remembered Santino's lesson, own the air. She walked toward Dante. She didn't look down. She looked straight into his pitch-black eyes. She smelled his cologne, too strong, masking the scent of stale tobacco. "I was a waitress, yes," Elena said, her voice steady and calm. "And do you know what you learn as a waitress, Mr. Corelli?" Dante sneered. "How to take a tip." "No," Elena said, stepping closer until she was invading his personal space. "You learn to watch people who think no one is watching, like how I watched you just now. You checked your phone 3 times since you walked in. You're sweating, even though the room is cool. And your left pupil is slightly more dilated than your right." Elena tilted her head. In the restaurant, that usually meant a man was waiting for a mistress, or he was high on cocaine. But here I think it means you're nervous. "Why are you nervous in the house of your Don, Dante?" Dante's smile vanished. The room went dead silent. Big Sal looked at Dante, then at Elena, impressed. Lorenzo let out a low, satisfied chuckle. "She has the eyes, Dante. Don't test her." "Sit," Lorenzo commanded. The dinner began. The tension was palpable, but the dynamic had shifted. Elena wasn't a prop. She was a player. She ate delicately, answering questions with brief, sharp answers. She spoke in Italian when addressed in Italian. As the main course, osso buco, was being cleared, the head of security, a man named Luca, burst into the room. He was pale. Don Lorenzo, Luca whispered urgently. What is it? Lorenzo demanded. Can't you see we are eating? A package, sir. It was left at the front gate. The guards didn't see who dropped it. There was no car. It just appeared. Bring it, Lorenzo said. Sir, it's not. Bring it. Luca signaled to a guard, who brought in a small, wrapped box. He placed it on the table. Santino stood up. Let me open it. He used a steak knife to slit the tape. He opened the flaps. Inside was a layer of black tissue paper. Santino pulled it back. He froze. What is it? Elena asked, leaning forward. Santino reached in and pulled out a small yellow object. It was a canary, dead. Its neck had been snapped. But it wasn't just a dead bird. In its beak, someone had stuffed a rolled-up piece of paper. Lorenzo slammed his fist on the table. Read the note! Santino pulled the paper from the bird's beak. He unrolled it. His face was grim. It's a message from Victor Russo, Santino said. He looked at Elena. It says ghosts should stay dead. If she breathes, the city burns. Dante Corelli stood up, throwing his napkin on the table. This is what happens. You bring a ghost into the house. You bring a war. The Russos know. They have a leak inside this house. Sit down, Dante, Lorenzo roared. No, Dante yelled. I didn't sign up to die for a waitress. The truce is broken because of her. Suddenly, the lights in the dining room flickered and died. Pitch blackness. Get down! Santino screamed. Crash! The massive bay window behind Elena shattered inward. Elena! Santino's voice tore through the dark. She felt a heavy body tackle her to the floor, just as the deafening crack, crack, crack of automatic gunfire shredded the air where she had been standing seconds ago. Wood splintered, glass flew, and the screams of men filled the darkness. She was pinned beneath Santino, his heart hammering against her back, as the sanctuary of the Giordano estate turned into a slaughterhouse. The war hadn't just started. It was already inside the room. The world had reduced itself to noise and terror. The rat-tat-tat of the assault rifles outside was rhythmic, mechanical, and terrifyingly close. Inside the dining room, chaos reigned. The darkness was punctuated only by the muzzle flashes of the Giordano guards firing blindly out of the shattered bay window. Move! Santino roared, his voice cutting through the ringing in Elena's ears. He hauled her up from the floor. She slipped on the broken glass, her heels skidding on a mixture of spilled wine and something thicker, darker. Santino didn't let her fall. He wrapped an arm around her waist, lifting her almost entirely off her feet, and sprinted toward the kitchen entrance. Clear the hall! Santino shouted into his lapel microphone. Package is moving! I repeat, package is moving! They burst through the swinging doors into the kitchen. The staff was screaming, huddled under stainless steel prep tables. Chef Antoine was holding a cleaver, his eyes wide with panic. Down! Stay down! Santino commanded as he dragged Elena past the stoves. He didn't head for the exit. He headed for the pantry. He kicked the door open and shoved a shelf of heavy pasta jars aside. Behind it was a steel panel. He punched a code into a keypad. Beep, 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 click. The panel hissed open, revealing a dark, concrete stairwell. Go, he urged, pushing her gently but firmly. Down the stairs. Don't stop until you hit the steel door. Elena scrambled down the cold steps, her breath coming in jagged gasps. Santino followed, sealing the pantry door behind them. The muffled sounds of war above them faded, replaced by the hum of ventilation systems. They reached the bottom. Another heavy door. Santino placed his palm on a scanner. The door groaned open, revealing a bunker that looked more like a command center than a basement. Banks of monitors lined one wall, showing thermal feeds of the estate. There were cots, weapons racks, and medical supplies. Lorenzo was already there. He was sitting on a crate, a nurse wrapping a bandage around his left bicep. His white shirt was stained red, but he looked more annoyed than hurt. You're alive, Lorenzo grunted, looking at Elena. Barely, Elena whispered, leaning against the cold concrete wall. Her legs finally gave out, and she slid down to the floor. Santino didn't rest. He went straight to the monitors. "Status!" he barked at the security operator, a young tech named Mikey, who looked like he was about to vomit. "They're falling back, sir," Mikey stammered. The guards pushed them to the tree line. "We have 2 shooters down. But what?" Lorenzo demanded, wincing as the nurse tightened the bandage. "Big Sal is dead, Don Lorenzo," Mikey said quietly. "Took a round to the neck. He didn't make it." The room went silent. Elena felt a wave of nausea. Big Sal, the man who had looked at her with respect just an hour ago. The man who had laughed at her observation of Dante. Gone. Sal was a good man, Lorenzo said, his voice low and dangerous. He had 5 grandchildren. "Dante?" Santino asked, scanning the screens. "Dante is in the West Wing, securing the perimeter. Frankie is with him," Mikey reported. "How did they get close enough to shoot out the window?" Santino slammed his hand on the console. "The sensors should have picked them up a mile out." "The thermal cameras, the motion detectors, how did they fail?" "The system was looped, sir," Mikey said, typing furiously. "Someone fed the cameras a pre-recorded loop of an empty lawn. They walked right up to the house invisible." "An inside job," Elena said. Her voice was shaky, but loud enough to be heard. Santino turned to her. He walked over and crouched down, checking her for injuries. He saw a small cut on her cheek from the flying glass. He reached out, his thumb gently brushing away a smear of blood near the cut. "Yes," Santino said, his eyes locked on hers. "Only 3 people have the codes to loop the system, me, my father, and the head of security, Luca." "Luca is dead," Lorenzo said heavily. "We found his body at the gate before the shooting started. They killed him to get his access card." "No," Santino shook his head, standing up. "Luca's card doesn't work without a biometric scan. They would have needed his eye or his finger. If they just shot him, they couldn't use the card immediately unless they had help from someone who could bypass the biometric lock." Elena finished the thought. She was thinking fast now, the adrenaline sharpening her mind. Who manages the software? Who hires the tech guys? Santino and Lorenzo exchanged a dark look. "Frankie," Lorenzo growled. "Frankie the fixer." "Frankie handles the payroll, the gambling tech, and the security contracts," Santino said, his face hardening into a mask of rage. "He's the only one who knows the backdoor codes to the server." "But Frankie was at the table," Elena argued. "He was in the line of fire." "Frankie was sitting at the far end," Santino recalled, his eyes narrowing. "When the lights went out, did anyone see him move?" Elena closed her eyes, replaying the terrifying moment. The darkness. The sound of the window breaking. "He dropped his fork," Elena whispered, "right before the lights cut, a second before, like he knew the jolt was coming." Lorenzo stood up, ignoring the nurse's protest. He walked over to the weapon rack and pulled down a matte black pistol. He checked the chamber with a loud clack. "We stay here until dawn," Lorenzo commanded. "Let the Russos think we are panicked. Let Frankie think he got away with it. Tomorrow, we don't just clean up the glass, we clean up the family." The hours in the panic room stretched out like an eternity. Lorenzo fell into a fitful sleep on one of the cots, the exhaustion of age and injury catching up to him. Santino sat on the floor next to Elena, his back against the wall, a rifle across his knees. "You should sleep," he told her softly. "I can't," Elena said. She was hugging her knees, shivering despite the warmth of the room. "Is this it? Is this my life now? Hiding in basements while people die upstairs?" "I told you," Santino said, looking at the ceiling. "It's a golden cage, but it keeps you alive." "I don't want to just be alive, Santino." Elena turned to look at him. "I want to live. There's a difference." Santino looked at her. In the harsh fluorescent light of the bunker, stripped of the glamour of the dining room, she looked raw and beautiful. He reached out and took her hand. His skin was rough, calloused from weapons and fighting. Hers was soft, but gripping him back tightly. "You have every right to run," Santino said. "When we get out of here, I can set you up in Europe. New name, new face. You can forget you ever met us." "Is that what you want?" Elena asked, searching his eyes. Santino hesitated. He looked at her lips, then back to her eyes. The air between them grew heavy, charged with the trauma of the night and something else, a magnetic pull that had been there since the restaurant. "No," Santino admitted, his voice a rough whisper. "I want you to stay. I want you to be the queen this family needs. I want to stand beside you." He leaned in closer. Elena didn't pull away. She could feel the heat radiating off him. "But if you stay," Santino whispered, his face inches from hers, "there is no going back. Your hands will get dirty. Your soul will get heavy. You will become one of us." "I am one of you," Elena whispered back. "I am my father's daughter." Santino closed the distance. He kissed her. It wasn't a gentle romance novel kiss. It was desperate, tasting of fear and adrenaline and blood. It was a seal, a pact made in the dark. Elena kissed him back with a ferocity that surprised them both, her hands tangling in his dark hair. For a moment, the war outside didn't exist. There was only the bunker, the breathing of the sleeping lion, and the two of them, forging a bond that would either save the family or destroy it. Dawn broke over the Giordano estate, revealing the scars of the night. In the main study, the mood was lethal. Frankie the fixer sat sweating, trying to blame the security failure on a hacker. "A hacker?" Santino scoffed, stepping forward. He tossed a plastic bag onto the table. Inside was a burner phone found in the bushes. "We pulled the last text sent at 8:02 p.m. Lights out in 2. Target is the girl." Frankie's face went gray. He reached for his waistband, but Santino was faster. Bang! Frankie screamed, clutching his shattered thigh, collapsing to the floor. Dante raised his gun to finish the rat, but Elena stepped in. "No," she commanded. "He is useful." She crouched in front of the bleeding traitor. "You owe the Russos money, don't you?" Frankie sobbed, admitting a massive gambling debt. Elena turned to Lorenzo with a cold, strategic look that mirrored the Don's own eyes. "We use him. Make him call Victor. Tell him the hit failed and that I'm hysterical, demanding to flee the country tonight from a private airfield." "A trap," Lorenzo smiled, realizing the brilliance of it. Victor's ego won't let him stay away. He'll want to finish the job himself. The plan was set. Frankie made the call with a gun to his head, sobbing a perfect performance. At midnight, the private hangar at Teterboro Airport was freezing. A Learjet sat waiting. Elena stood by the stairs, clutching a coat, acting the part of the terrified girl. Santino stood nearby, disguised as a chauffeur. 3 SUVs screeched into the hangar, blocking the exit. Victor Russo stepped out, leaning on a cane, surrounded by 12 armed mercenaries. "The ghost tries to fly away." Victor boomed, limping closer. He laughed cruelly. "You look just like your mother." She screamed so prettily when the fire took her. Rage flared in Elena's chest, burning away the fear. She looked Victor in the eye. "My mother died protecting me," she called out, her voice steady. "You didn't win, Victor. You just made us wait." "Wait for what?" Victor sneered. "Your death." "No," Elena said, dropping her hand, the signal, "for this." She dropped flat to the tarmac. Crack! A single shot rang out from the control tower, 300 yards away. Lorenzo, the old marksman, didn't miss. Victor Russo's knee exploded in a mist of red. He collapsed, screaming. "Now!" Santino yelled. The hangar erupted. Dante and his men burst from the cargo hold of the jet and from behind fuel crates. It was an ambush of military precision. Caught in the open and confused by their leader's fall, the Russo mercenaries were cut down in seconds. Silence returned to the hangar, broken only by Victor's groans. Elena stood up, unharmed. She walked over to the man who had haunted her life, now writhing on the concrete. "You wanted the girl, Victor?" she whispered, looking down at him. "You got her. Welcome to the family reunion." The drive back to the estate was a silent victory lap. Victor Russo, bound and bleeding from his shattered knee, was dragged into the Giordano wine cellar. He was thrown into a heavy oak chair, the same place where many enemies of the family had met their end. Lorenzo stood over him, looking like an emperor. but he stepped aside when Elena entered. She had shed her tactical gear, standing before the man who killed her parents with a chilling calmness. "Your blood is weak, Lorenzo." Victor spat, wincing in pain. "You let a girl fight your battles." "The girl won," Lorenzo replied simply. "Elena, he is yours." Elena stepped closer. She smelled the fear radiating off Victor, a sour scent she recognized from cornered rats. "You killed my past," she whispered, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "Now I kill yours." She took a combat knife from Dante. Victor flinched, squeezing his eyes shut, expecting the blade. But instead, Elena leaned down and cut the rope, binding his left hand. Victor blinked, confused. "Do it! Just kill me!" "I am not a butcher," Elena said coldly, tossing the knife to Santino. "Death is too easy for you, Victor." She turned to Santino, her voice shifting to icy corporate precision. "Get the laptop. We don't kill him until he transfers every cent of the Russo fortune to the Giordano Trust. We bankrupt his organization, we buy his buildings, we leave him with nothing." Victor screamed in protest. To a man like him, irrelevance and poverty were a fate far worse than death. "Make him comfortable," Elena ordered Dante as she walked out. "It's going to be a long night." She emerged onto the main balcony as the sun began to rise, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange. Lorenzo followed her. "Cruel mercy," Lorenzo noted with pride. "You are truly Antonio's daughter. You are the heir, Elena. The family answers to you now." He squeezed her shoulder and left her alone with Santino. Santino joined her at the railing, the sounds of the cellar fading beneath them. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was the bond of two survivors. "You were terrifying down there," Santino murmured, moving closer. "I felt like I was acting," she admitted. "The mask eventually becomes the face," he said. He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You know, technically, we are cousins." Elena's heart raced. "Technically." "But I was adopted," Santino reminded her, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "No blood relation, which means there are no rules against this." He kissed her. It was a slow, deliberate claiming, sealing their partnership and their future. Elena kissed him back, realizing she could never go back to being the invisible girl. She had tasted power, and she had tasted love. 3 months later, Il Palazzo reopened to a frenzy of paparazzi. The official story was a gas leak, but the underworld knew the truth. A black limousine pulled up. Elena stepped out, wearing a black velvet gown and dripping in Giordano diamonds. She walked toward the entrance, Santino on her arm. Marco, the manager who used to yell at her, bowed so low he nearly tipped over. "Donna Elena, your table is ready." "Thank you, Marco," she said smoothly. "And try not to shake so much. It upsets the wine." She swept past him to the corner booth, the very spot where she had once spilled wine on the lion. Lorenzo was waiting. Elena sat down, not as a servant, but as the owner. She raised her glass of Barolo. "To family," Lorenzo toasted. "To the dialect." Elena smiled, her eyes flashing with the fire of a queen. They clinked glasses and the entire city bowed. This story isn't just about the Mafia. It's about the hidden power within us all. Elena spent her life thinking she was nobody, invisible and weak. But the moment she embraced her true heritage, her voice, her history, and her instincts, she didn't just survive. She conquered. It reminds us that sometimes the things we think are our weaknesses are actually our greatest strengths waiting to be unlocked. Whether it's a dialect from a small village or a quiet observation skill, you never know what key will open the door to your destiny. If you enjoyed this twisty tale of romance, danger, and ultimate revenge, please give this video a like. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. And tell me in the comments, if you found out you were the heir to a secret empire, would you take the crown or would you run? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.